So visual effects on a film, for me, as an internal visual effects supervisor, I'm attached to a facility rather than what we call client side. My role can vary massively from film to film. It can be that I'm just office-based in London dealing with a film that's already been shot, and we get turnover, and then we work out what the work is and do it. Or usually on a Christopher Nolan film, I'm involved from the beginning, and we do the shoot, gather all of our reference material during the shoot, and then sort of bring it all back to the London facility where we start to work on it. So it can be quite varied from film to film, from director to director for me.
Yeah. My name's Paul Corbold. I was the UK and European effects supervisor. Scott Fisher was the US, and basically Scott contacted me to round a team of guys out and send them out to like Dunkirk and Holland and set up a workshop in the UK as well. And it was basically to assist Scott with equipment and technicians really, do the testing in Dunkirk.
As practical special effects, we do more SFX than visual effects. That's what Paul and I do, and we, anything mechanical rigs or pyrotechnics, wind, rain, fire. We, on this particular film, we built the model miniature planes. We built gimbals, sinking ships, did fire in the water.
Yeah,
a little bit of everything. Cannons. Yeah, water cannons.
Yeah.
So. Did you do any smoke at all?
And we did some black smoke.
Definitely remember there being some smoke.
Yeah.
Black and white smoke.
Yeah. I was the overall visual effects supervisor, and so that role really involves right from the very start talking to the director, working out what they need for the particular project you're on. For quite a while, you're just really researching that whole area and working out what. In this particular film was fantastic because there's so much material about the Second World War and aerial dogfights and the sort of things that happen. So there's a ton of archival footage. So a lot of research, and then that goes on to analysing the script and working out the previs, where that was needed and what was necessary to get out of that. And then after pre-production, a lot of liaising with other departments, art department and special effects and stunts, because for visual effects there's always a lot of crossover, a lot of ways to achieve, different ways to achieve the same thing, and it can be more visual effects heavy or more, we can build set extensions in visual effects or we can build them in the real world, and the same with special effects. We can do explosions as a visual effect or a practical effect, or we can quite often shoot different elements and combine them in post in visual effects. So there's so many different ways to approach the same subject. And so pre-production is very much a case of negotiating with all the other departments, find where the best solution is for that film. So that's pre, and then you head into the shoot and hopefully implement the plans that we've made in pre-production. But they change all the time as well, and you need to accommodate that and constantly talking to the other departments and the director and making sure that you learn stuff on the way during the shoot, that things becomes really obvious sometimes that a plan that you had is clearly not going to work. We need a whole different one. So that happens during the shoot. I always try and focus the way that we do the visual effects on using as many practical elements as I can. So we spend a lot of time shooting things for real on camera to be used in visual effects later. On this film, I worked with Scott's team a lot with the miniature planes. So we were shooting from helicopters, flying around with, we say miniature planes, but they're actually quarter scale. So some of the bomber was an 18-foot wingspan radio-controlled model, and we were filming that from the helicopter. And so I was involved with that. And then in post-production, working with Andy back in London really closely with all the visual effects team, putting the shots together and finishing them off and delivering them to the editorial department to cut back in. So my role is there from right at the very beginning, before pre starts properly, right through pre-production, the shoot and post-production. So it's really one of the longest lasting roles on the film production. From the visual effects point of view, it sort of divides up into several areas. In the pre-production, there's the previs, which is usually quite a small team of a handful of people, getting through work quite fast and a lot of turnaround. And then there's the on-set crew, which I don't know, on this we had probably about 10 at the most, 10 people.
Yeah. So they're sort of there just to do reference gathering, photography and things like that, but they will usually stay on the entire run of the show. So once the shoot's finished, they'll also come back to London and we'll have a lot of information that's really invaluable, so we tend to keep them all on the show all the way through post. We try and assemble a core team fairly early on at the beginning of a show, and that will be a CG supervisor who has an in-depth knowledge of the 3D side of the visual effects pipeline. As Andrew says, there'll be a previs team who are very specialised in doing very quick, fast animations in order to inform the shoots on some occasions of how things might need to be shot. Then there'll be an animation supervisor who will deal with any animation that comes up on the show, like if we need to reanimate a plane or if we're adding digital crews to a ship or soldiers on the beach. And then there'll be a compositing supervisor who is very 2D focused and basically assembles all these little bits, so elements that were shot during the shoot, the CG renders of any ships that we might need to do, the smoke that Scott shot will be cannibalized from all over the place and used like many times in lots of different shots. And that compositing supervisor is usually the person that will be in charge of the overall look of the finished shot. But during that whole process, literally hundreds of other specialized people will come on and off the show. So at any one time, there could be 200 people working on the film. And by the time you've gone from start to finish, maybe closer to 300 people. So there's a lot of very specialized roles that come and go all through post-production.
And more as well, these days we're focusing on rotoscoping rather than using green screens. So that's another large number of people working on separating elements in the shot. So rather than putting green screens up during the shoot, on this particular film, we didn't use a single green screen in the whole film. So, but in order to do that, it does mean that you need to dedicate more time to separate, roto artists to be able to separate the various elements.
For the practical side, we took 36 technicians out, combining of engineers, fabricators and floor technicians from the UK. And obviously Scott had quite a large team in the US. And we kind of all went out to France and we kind of got that underway, and then we dispatched a little team to go out to Holland to start setting up out there. But it was amazing what we achieved in the amount of time that we had. We literally had 8 weeks, to get all that together. When we first started talking about it, we all we thought it was going to be another Saving Private Ryan, and we need hundreds of guys. When we went out on the scout, and Chris Nolan is specific exactly what he wanted, it all became quite clear that it was achievable, for the amount of time that we had to do it. But it was a great experience.
Like Andrew said, all the stuff we do is really a collaboration, and from beginning to end, it's really working with the director, working with Chris, and trying to figure out his methodology of what he wanted to do. And then it kind of evolves as you go. The miniature planes are a good example, because early on, I think most of us thought those were going to be mostly CG because there's no flying examples of a lot of those period planes. We did some research, we looked at other films, and Chris was really keen. He liked the look of that, and we knew what we could achieve with miniature planes. So then, that evolved into that, and so we kind of would have a lot of different meetings about the type of stuff that we needed to provide to make sure we were covered for every shot, as far as not just one aspect. That's just the miniature planes, but that would go through for originally we first started, we talked about doing a bunch of pyro stuff for these big explosions that were needed in the water, but then once we got to France, we weren't going to be able to do that. They kind of said that we couldn't do the pyrotechnics in the water, so then we thought maybe it would become a visual effect, but then worked with Paul and his guys, and we figured out a way to do it with pneumatic cannons, and we did it. But it was like each effect kind of, as it comes up, there's that same collaboration of how it could be achieved through visual effects or practical effects, and then what the directors asked for, and then what we can provide. And if it's not quite what we need, then that's where Andrew's team will take over and kind of add a bit to it. Or
we allow for being able to build everything pretty much as a full CG asset. We photograph and scan all the planes and the ships, and so we were able to build a complete full CG version of everything. And in fact, we did use bits of them on the side of the planes, and to stop the propellers spinning when the engine was supposed to be stalled, and undercarriage coming up and down. And there are CG pieces of of all those planes. But in a way, it's like it allows us to go into the shoot and try and achieve as much as we can in camera. And it turned out that on this film, really, there's only very few shots that have a full CG plane. They're usually quite small in the background, but the vast majority.
We built some of the highest resolution models I've ever seen on a show, and they get used very minimally. But if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to do like these small corrections. So while it might seem like a huge overkill to have all of these planes built to IMAX resolution, which is, you know, that's a huge resolution, we couldn't do simple things like using a flopped plate, which then puts all of the numbers and all the signs on the planes the wrong way around. We can use our high-res models to unflip all of the call sign numbers on the sides of the planes and all that kind of thing.
Adding the tails to all of the gimbal shots, like all of the close-up shots of the pilots flying the plane were shot on a gimbal that Scott's team built in America, and we had the idea of shooting it on the cliff next to the ocean so we could have the real horizon in the background. But the gimbal cockpit was quite short, so whenever we had shots that looked down the side, we needed to add the whole back of the plane in the back of the shot, and again we were able to use those really high-res models to extend the plane.
That's Chris's methodology is always to get as much as you can. I think a lot of directors, they look at it and they very early on make that decision whether it's going to be a CG or a practical effect, and Chris is always just very optimistic that he's going to get everything and then figure out a way to get what he doesn't get, you know.
That approach of covering yourself to for anything that we weren't able to achieve allows you to actually try and do more on set, because you know you always have that fallback going for a CG solution if you need to. I think it was really important for the feel of the sort of style of aerial battle tactics in that era. So we did a lot of research and reading and watching archival footage about that. So it's very good to inspire the choreography, if you like, of the battle scenes.
I think he was quite keen to avoid super quick dogfight, you know, sort of Star Wars style dramatic fly-throughs, and keep it quite close to, you know, there's a lot of archive footage out there of what these dogfights were like, and it's quite tense. You know, they're slowly tracking around on the enemy planes and lining them up on the sights. And
it's sort of combination of very long, slow turning action, and then very fast sort of maneuvering if you're going towards each other.
Definitely looked at like some of the films and what had been done in other films and what had been done CG, and he definitely didn't want to go down that route. So that's why I think was one of the other main reasons for the planes as well. Yeah,
there was a really strong sort of thing that we really wanted to avoid, was ever having a camera in a place where it felt like you couldn't have shot that for real. So we really wanted everything to feel like you could have put a camera in one plane and filmed another plane passing. So that was a very strong directive for the whole film, really, is to never have that. Because it's one thing that I think quite often, very often, actually makes a shot feel very fake, is if you invent a camera move that is very, it would be impossible to do any other way than as a CG camera, then immediately the whole scene becomes unbelievable, because you've just flown through a keyhole or through a propeller on a plane. Immediately you lose any kind of believability of that scene. So
mainly art department and construction. There's quite a lot of crossovers, you know, with us. Some of the backgrounds that they wanted to lose, you know, we used to help them out with, you know, covering it with black smoke or white smoke. There's the hospital ship as well. That was kind of a team effort, you know, the sinking model. So really, all departments kind of sort of muscled in together, really.
And there were big, like half-scale planes that got built at the last minute as well. Like there's a big Stuka that we drop into the sea, which is very much special effects. Yeah. Some visual effects input, but mostly art department and special effects.
Yeah, and all of our gimbals, you know, we built the structures and like the ships and stuff like that, and then art department came in and clad them and made them look correct with the paint and all the finishes.
The key thing was really the key to our shooting day, wasn't it, the tides? Because when we was doing the explosions on the beach, we had to do like a test dig, you know, because you have to dig down sort of like 4 feet, so you know you don't hit water, so we can, you know, lay the charges, and then we put the sand that's been sort of sieved with all the stones. But we had to do a test. Wait till the tide got out. We knew once the tide got out to a certain distance that we could start preparing And then we literally had a few hours to get all those charges in. Everything was worked down to the last sort of hour, really.
I mentioned a little bit earlier about how we, when we were filming the miniature planes, we had to get the radio control pilots into the helicopter, take the helicopter off, and then signal to the ground crew to release the radio controlled plane. So we would then have the two planes in the air, the helicopter and the plane, and we'd have to fly several miles out to sea. Before we start filming, we meet up with the boats and the main unit that were out over the water. And because we were shooting miniature planes, we were shooting at 48 frames, so double the frame rate, and a 1,000-foot roll on a IMAX camera only lasts for just over a minute. If everything worked and we got the plane in the air and we got out there and the plane stayed in the air all the way, then we have 1 minute to shoot while we're out there. And
if the camera didn't jam.
I was going to say, and quite often the cameras would jam, like they might shoot half the roll or none, and then it was all back to base, land the plane, land the helicopter, reload the camera or fix the camera. Working with IMAX cameras added quite a lot of complexity to the work we were doing, but having said that, the results are so beautiful that it really is worth it, isn't it? And it makes it almost feels like it's more worthwhile because it's so hard.
The water cannons were another one. They were quite a challenge. They had to be towed out every day. When we was in France, they had to be towed up the channel, and they had to come back every day. So it was like 2 hours to get them there and 2 hours to get them back, maybe quicker because you're going with the tide. You know, when we was in Holland, they had to be picked up by crane and put on a tug, taken out to where they wanted to film this, the sequence, and then at the end of the day we had to get them back, so nothing could be left out at night. So it's quite a challenge for the marine department as well. Again, it was a team effort there.
How were the water cannons triggered? Were
they were all radio controlled, so there was no cables running to it. They were all self-contained with like nitrogen cylinders, radio control trigger mechanisms. They self-filled as well, so when they go off, they self-filled. Every time you're going to want to move them around, suit them to camera.
Well, I was thinking the things that always make me the most nervous on a Nolan film is trying to get digi-doubles past him. He's got a rather unforgiving eye, hasn't he, when it comes to, well, anything digital, but particularly digital people. On most films, it's pretty much a given that you're going to have to use some digi-doubles of the main actors or background people, and it's just something you have as a library of things to help pad out a shot. But on a Nolan film, it's so difficult to get that last sort of 3% to make them look just real enough.
Working at IMAX resolution, a tiny person in a frame is still a huge...
Yeah, that's
and
right.
When you zoom into full res, you can see everything so clearly.
So that little guy that you thought was just walking past in the background, you can now see that he's not looking in the right direction, or his hair's pointing the wrong way. And it's the whole thing is very unforgiving. There's nowhere to hide at all.
IMAX resolution definitely adds a whole lot of extra pressure, doesn't it? To everything that we do. But worthwhile, like I said.